What's up and welcome to an episode of Gizmo Slip Tech. Today we're looking at the GE66, arguably one of the best laptops you can buy still in 2020, though whether or not you should buy with the RTX 3000 series still hanging around in the limbo, like maybe it's going to come out for laptops soon. I would expect the RTX 3000 cards probably in CES 2021, so January 2021. So if you need to get a laptop before then this is a potential option for you that is very, very juicy. MSI's goal for this laptop seemed to be how much power can we possibly pack into a 15-inch laptop without making it overly thick, but at the same time having moderate thickness. And overall, I really like MSI's design goal here because it provides a moderate amount of power with significantly more battery life than what you get in a lot of 15-inch laptops, while still packing in some excellent high-performance components. Let's take a quick look at the specs. We've got an RTX 2080 Max Q. We've got an 8-core overclockable i9-10980HK. Now keep in mind that out of the box, this thing is not overclockable. The processor is locked down as if it's like a 10750H. But if you go into the BIOS and you enable the advanced BIOS, you do a combo of keys in the BIOS and it unlocks the advanced BIOS features, which lets you unlock the processor so that you can overclock it and control the power limits. So if you don't want the CPU spiking in temps, you can easily power limit it, or you can push it to the max and get the most possible performance at the expense, obviously, of additional temps. I love that they are allowing users to do this. I just kind of wish it was a little bit easier to enable, like it was just a setting in Dragon Center instead of having to go through the BIOS and know a special key combo set. It's not that hard to do. It's just an extra step before you can modify and customize the CPU clocks and power speeds and undervolt, which I did undervolt, and I did actually benchmark this before I figured out that you can unlock the CPU. So I have a full set of benchmarks. All the benchmarks were done without the undervolt, and then some of them have the undervolt as well for a comparison. Now there are a few different variants of the GE66. You have like the $1,800 version that's from like I think last year with an RTX 2070 and last gen processor, and then you have like $2,200 versions of the current gen hardware, again RTX 2070, and then you have the $3,000 version with the overclockable processor and the RTX 2080 Max Q. So you've got a wide range of potential performance options with this machine. Obviously the lower end $1,800 machine is going to give you way better bang for your buck because you're not going to be paying that premium cost on slightly better performance. Now this chassis is all metal, and I just really liked what MSI did overall with the design. We've got this wonderful LED light bar that is customizable, and there's a whole bunch of light up zones, so you can actually customize the light to stay stationary or to fluctuate, a few different modes there. The keyboard as well is excellent. It's got great feel, good depth. I love the texture of the keys and the font they put on the keys. The backlighting is also excellent, though not particularly bright. It's bright enough to see in a well-lit room, but not like you can see right now, you can kind of barely see it in this fairly bright environment. So if you're in daylight, you're not going to really be able to see it. The touchpad on this machine is fantastic. It's very, very functional. You can click it down even near the top, though the top portion is more difficult to press down than the middle and bottom. So I kind of wish they had designed a touchpad that was easily clickable throughout the whole travel of the pad, but very few Windows laptops are pulling that off at this time. So that's one area for improvement. So I kind of think of this as like an LED light up tank of a laptop, which I think is a fairly good way to summarize its overall design aesthetic. Now the ports on this machine are solid. On the left side we have a headphone jack, a USB-C, and a USB Type A, and then we have this big massive exhaust and a Kensington lock port. Then on the back we have the laptop's power adapter, an HDMI, a network port, a USB-C with display port, and then a mini display port as well. So you've got a lot of display outs on this machine. Sadly, we're missing USB-C charging on both of these USB-Cs, as well as Thunderbolt 3. So if you're looking to hook up an eGPU in the future, that's kind of out of the window. And then if you're also looking to do USB-C charging on the go, that's also out of the window, which is, I think, a big bummer. All manufacturers, I think, at this point need to be including USB-C charging, because I think a lot of people will want to take advantage of that. Now, on the right side, we have two more USB-As flanking a full-size SD card slot. And I love that there's a full-size SD card slot on this machine. So this is kind of the dream ports for a laptop, especially a 15-inch laptop. minus the USB-C charging and Thunderbolt 3. Now the 300 Hz display is great for fast-paced games, so if you're into first-person shooters or quick response titles, this is a great display for you. At 294 nits, 91% sRGB, and 73% Adobe RGB, it's about average for color gamut and brightness for similar high refresh rate displays. That said, I really like having a higher color gamut display because it makes the games pop better, but if you're a competitive-oriented gamer, you can't really ask for a better display. The only other downside is this is only a 1080p display instead of a 1440p display, which I think the gaming industry should move towards. Now we've got great battery life on this machine. We've got the maximum battery size at 99.9 watt hours, which is going to let you take it on the plane still, but have the most possible battery capacity, which seems like a lot of the 15-inch more portable laptops these days are only rocking like 70 watt hour batteries. So it's nice to see a 100 watt hour battery. This will allow you to push a little bit longer battery life, especially compared to the laptops that have the smaller battery sizes. When you're streaming Netflix, you're looking at about 5.5 to 6 hours of Netflix at max brightness, about 7 to 8 hours of web browsing, 8 to 10 hours of airplane mode, and 1.5 to 2 hours of gaming depending on your settings. That's a bit more than I think you'd expect for a laptop of these specifications, which I really like. Now I gotta throw a caveat here in the battery life section because the RTX 2080 Max Q kept turning on occasionally, sucking more power than was required, and so I had to kind of monitor it using HW info. I just would check every now and then, has the NVIDIA GPU turned on recently? No, yes. And I think it has to do with what applications you have enabled, and I think it has to do with Windows controlling whether or not the NVIDIA GPU is on or off. Either way, I just really think that MSI and a lot of these other manufacturers right now really need to troubleshoot to make sure that Optimus hybrid graphics switching is working properly and keeping that NVIDIA GPU dead so it doesn't prematurely drain your battery life. So one major downside of this device is that it does come with some bloatware installed, especially Norton Antivirus, which can A, slow down your computer, B, have a number of pop-ups that occurred during my benchmarking and using of the laptop, which were super annoying, so just remove that bloatware right off the top. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at some benchmarks, starting off with the power limits for this laptop. When under a dual stress test load, you can get 58 watts of power to the CPU and 89 watts of power to the GPU. The CPU at 58 watts under a dual load is pretty good and is certainly above average, which I think I would expect given that we have an i9 10980HK. That said, the i9 in this machine could certainly easily push over 100 watts of power through it given an unlimited power limit. So that really goes to show you that we're not maximizing the i9's potential performance in this machine. Now when you do just a CPU only test, we get 69 watts of power to the CPU. That's better and it's improved, but again, we could easily push over 100 watts of power through a CPU like this. So it's a little disappointing that we don't have a higher power limit on the CPU out of the box. Now of course, if you go and unlock the CPU, you can increase that power limit, but you're going to see really high temperatures, and the reason for this is that there's only 2 heat pipes to the CPU when there's like 4 for the GPU. And I think in my mind, the thermal design basically prioritizes the gaming aspect of this laptop and not the CPU aspect of the laptop. So if you're looking for a dedicated CPU rendering machine, this probably isn't it because the thermal design is really centered around that RTX 2080 Max Q. Let's go ahead and take a look at some gaming benchmarks. We got 63 FPS and Red Dead Redemption on Ultra. That's solid and above average. Believe it or not, Red Dead Redemption 2 is ridiculously hard to run at a high frame rate on ultra settings. That said, when you drop it down to balanced, you get over 100 FPS. That's pretty good. For The Witcher 3, 129 FPS. That's ridiculously good. Far Cry 5, 118. Very good. And same performance in Far Cry 5 when you undervolted the machine versus not having it undervolted, which was pretty interesting. Though the temperatures, I imagine, are going to be a little bit less when you have that undervolt enabled. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, 107. Really good FPS in all of these titles. Really impressed with the overall gaming performance of this machine. Let's go ahead and move on to some synthetic benchmarks. We have 3D Mark Time Spy Graphics, got 9,091. You can see this is a little bit behind the Razer Blade Pro 17, but you have to keep in mind the Razer Blade Pro is a 17-inch chassis, this is a 15-inch chassis, and also synthetic benchmarks doesn't really mean everything necessarily. As far as graphical performance per pound, this tops my charts for graphical performance per pound, and that's because we have an RTX 2080 Max Q in a very overall thin and light and portable package and a 15-inch chassis. So if you're looking for like gaming chops, gaming performance on the go, this is arguably one of the top picks. Now there's going to be some other competitors out there like the Razer Blade 15 with RTX 2080, the Alienware M15 with RTX 2080. There's a number of high performance machines out there that would give this one a run for the money. Just know that this is top tier as far as gaming performance on the go. Now with that premium performance, it comes with a premium price tag, and you can see that the points per dollar is very low, near the bottom of the pack. Not quite, but it is close. Now we're getting to the CPU performance here for Cinebench R20 Multi. You can see that with an undervolt, we performed quite a bit better with about 300 more points, which is like an 8 to 9% performance improvement just from undervolting. That said, this performance is really not that great, especially considering there's a number of Ryzen laptops out there that have better performance for like 1/3 or 1/2 the cost. So really not great performance per dollar, but it's solid all-around performance. So I mean, if you need primarily a gaming machine, but you also want to be able to render things fairly well at times, this machine will do you just fine. For Cinebench points per pound, we're above average, but it's not great. Now, as far as Cinebench points per dollar goes, this is again near the bottom of the pack. It's an expensive laptop with moderate performance. It's just not going to go well for you when you're looking at performance on a budget. Taking a look at the Handbrake 4K render time, we've got a little bit over 8.5 minutes, which is above average, which is what you would expect from a higher end i9 from Intel. That said, we're still being outperformed by Ryzen in this render test, so just expect good, not great CPU performance. Taking a look at my dual load stress test, you can see that we have excellent fan noise in all of the power profiles, except when we enable max fans, 56.7 decibels with max fan, which really isn't that bad for a max fan, but it's still noticeably loud at that point. At 51 decibels, that's going to be noticeable in a very quiet room, but only a little bit, so that's pretty good in my opinion. Taking a look at the temperatures, we've got absolutely superb temperatures on the GPU, 65 degrees down to 57 degrees under typical fan profiles. When you go to silent mode, you get up to 77 degrees on the GPU. That's still very good temps all around. Now on the CPU, we averaged 83 degrees Celsius. We do have a little bit of spiking above that, but typically speaking, those are really good CPU temperatures and really good GPU temperatures. Now in real life gaming usage, I did see occasional spikes in the temperatures, especially in Far Cry 5, but it was typically pretty minimal, and the primary way this is managed is that basically we're getting power limited anytime the temperature hits 83 degrees. It just instantly kind of power limits the CPU down. Taking a look at the clock speeds, you can see that silent mode actually had the best performance. Now this is something that I also saw on the Razer Blade Pro with the RTX 2080 Max Q in that laptop. This is because the CPU takes up a whole bunch of power, and in the silent mode, the CPU power is reduced, allowing the GPU power to suck up that extra juice and dynamically boost beyond its typical 90-watt power limit, which is really interesting, and I'm actually super curious now that I'm in the middle of it. What if you power limited the CPU down to like this 2.6 gigahertz at all times, like base clock speed? Would you be able to have significantly higher GPU clocks consistently? Someone test it and let me know in the comments down below if you have this laptop. But you might be able to get quite a bit more performance out of it if it's only a GPU bound game. If it's a CPU bound game, you don't want to down the clock speed on the CPU, otherwise you're going to suffer, obviously. In the different power profiles, you can see that we have different levels of CPU performance, with the best performance being in the extreme performance with max fan enabled. And that of course allows the CPU to ramp up more and increase the power limit that it has. So if you're someone who has a cooling pad, you probably will actually see additional performance with this particular laptop, because it's basically being thermally throttled at 83 degrees, and if you can keep the temperature below 83, it'll try to push as much possible performance to that CPU as it can. In my Far Cry 5 benchmark, this machine almost tops the charts. It certainly tops the charts for 15-inch laptops. Now I do want to point out that this performed just a little bit better than the Razer Blade Pro 17, even though the Razer Blade Pro 17 had higher synthetic scores, and this kind of goes to show you that real-world performance has a lot more complexities to it. And the primary reason why this performed better than the Razer Blade Pro 17 is because this has the i9 processor, which is just going to be better silicon and run at slightly higher performance limits, giving you just a little bit more FPS in CPU-bound games like Far Cry 5. Now, in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we got 107 FPS, which is actually lower than the Razer Blade Pro by like 6. So you can see that this thing is trading blows with the Razer Blade Pro 17, which is basically what I would expect given we have a 15-inch chassis versus a 17-inch chassis and the randomness of performance benchmarks. Now, the speakers on this machine are not bad. They just sound a little bit muffled, and they do get fairly loud, but again, because they're kind of muffled, it's not a great audio experience. It's just kind of like average. I think the main reason is because the speakers themselves are completely covered up by metal. You have this little cheese grate side to the panel here right by the speaker, but that's about the only way the sound can get out, and it's just not enough access to the outside to be able to really put out that sound clearly, which is kind of sad. Overall, I really love this machine. I love that they prioritize just being a little bit thicker and increasing the performance and battery life by having that little bit of thickness while still maintaining an overall very small form factor. And I really love the build quality of this machine. I love the keyboard, the trackpad, the gaming performance is top notch. The primary weaknesses of this machine is the way the CPU is being power limited, so you're not getting the full potential of the i9-10980HK. So if you need really high-end CPU performance, this probably isn't the laptop to go for, though I mean, CPU performance in this portable of a package is kind of hard to come by. And I mean, as far as gaming CPU performance, this is, again, top tier. The i9 is the best gaming CPU that you can get right now, better than the Ryzen. I primarily would recommend this laptop to gamers that are looking for the best performance in an ultra portable package. That said, this RTX 2080 Max Q variant is not a great bang for the buck when it comes to performance per dollar. So if you're on a budget, this is probably not the version of this laptop to get. You probably want to get the $1,800 or $2,200 version. I found several on Amazon. I'll have links in the description down below to the GE66 on a number of different websites so you can do some price comparisons with the different models that they have out there. But for anyone that's on a budget and wants a more moderately priced laptop, I would highly recommend going for that RTX 2070 with the last generation of processor if you can find it, because you're going to get a lot more bang for the buck at $1,800. I love what MSI is trying to do here, and I can't wait to see the next version of this machine with the RTX 3000 series in a few months here. But in the meantime, if you need to buy a laptop right now, this is a good one. That's it for my review of the GE66. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please slap a like on this video, and if you want to make sure to not miss out on my reviews in the future, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell, mark it to all, and that way you'll be for sure to be notified next time I post a video. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Brandon out. Watch out.